This is a long two-part comment, so I will leave a comment with a screenshot so that people can read both of them. I'm gonna give a disclaimer here that this is very likely to be a very triggering topic for a whole lot of CSA survivors, so be very careful. This person was kind of warning me that the book, The Courage to Heal, they said that they were in a psychology course and were warned against this book. And I am absolutely not claiming to be an expert or to be particularly well researched in this. What I was trying to say isn't controversial is what the third edition of the book is. And just like what I was reading in this video, I don't think that that is controversial. I think that the idea of your body having wisdom and knowledge and kind of storing trauma is pretty widely accepted by most therapists and like the psychology field currently. But that is not to say exact details. So like, for example, if somebody were to come to a therapist and say, I have noticed that I have always really hated when my Uncle Jim comes over. I hated going to his house as a kid, and I have an Apple Watch now, and I've noticed that I get a heart rate alert if he comes anywhere near me. And he's always just been a little creepy, and he makes kind of weird comments about women, and I've just kind of always wondered if he could have done something to me, and if I just don't fully remember it. My interpretation of how a typical therapist might respond to that would be not to suggest false memories, but also not to say, oh, he raped you, because like, of course we don't know. It very well may be that he never touched her. But I also think it's pretty typical for therapists to believe that your body doesn't do that for no reason. Maybe that reason isn't physical sexual abuse. It could be emotional sexual abuse, like sexual harassment, other like creepy, covert CSA type behaviors. It could be not sexual at all. It could be maybe he like beat you one time, or maybe he emotionally abused you in non-sexual ways. But if your nervous system is really triggered by him, there's probably a reason. My understanding is that therapists would kind of encourage that person to just listen to their body, whatever feels right to them. Like if you don't want to talk to him, if you don't want to be around him, like valid. Regardless of knowing what he did or didn't do. Like if your body doesn't want to be around him, like trust yourself, listen to yourself, and this doesn't feel good, I'm gonna get out of here. But they also wouldn't imply any details about anything that happened. They would maybe just kind of ask the person questions about how they feel about all of this, or whatever, explore their thoughts and feelings, but not outright suggest anything. And that's my understanding of what this book does, is that it says, basically, listen to your body. It outright says in certain portions that a whole lot of people will never know every detail. It also outright says that sometimes people have memories, whether recovered or non-recovered, like they could have always remembered them, that might be slightly incorrect. Like maybe in like a super factual sense, like maybe you recall 4 instances and it happened 3 times, and you for some reason split off one instance into 2 separate days, or something like that. Trauma memories are often kind of patchy and very sensory based, and they do often lack like a real narrative, like that it's not unusual for it to not be something that you can document every detail of with perfect accuracy, but also that like having that level of detail doesn't usually matter, and knowing the general truth of your experience, and also for healing that. I want to read part of how this book addresses the revision between the first and the third. For the first 4 years after its publication in 1988, The Courage to Heal was not considered controversial. Then suddenly, in 1992, with the emergence of a highly publicized backlash against survivors, The Courage to Heal was among the individuals, groups, and books that were targeted for attack. As the most visible self-help resource for survivors, it was blamed for inducing quote-unquote false memories, tearing families apart, and creating a climate of quote-unquote hysteria around child sexual abuse. As authors, we have been criticized for our lack of academic credentials, but you do not have to have a PhD to listen carefully and compassionately to another human being. In fact, our perspective as laypeople helped us to take the suffering of survivors out of the realm of pathology and instead to present them as strong, capable people who'd been hurt. They point out that in their original, they included advice when choosing a counselor that said things like, if you feel your therapist is pressuring you to say that you were abused, you're seeing the wrong therapist. Find someone who will follow your lead and not insist that they know your final destination. Also, the exact quote from the original that was so controversial read, so far, no one we've talked to has thought she might have been abused and then later discovered that she hadn't been. The progression always goes the other way, from suspicion to confirmation. If you think you were abused and your life shows the symptoms, then you were. Since writing that statement, we have talked to a small number of women who have thought they had been sexually abused, but who found, after much exploration, that the pain they were suffering resulted from emotional abuse or other early trauma. In this edition, we have written it this way instead. It is rare that someone thinks she was sexually abused and then discovers she wasn't. The progression usually goes the other way, from suspicion to confirmation. If you genuinely think you were abused and your life shows the symptoms, there's a strong likelihood that you were. If you're not sure, keep an open mind. Be patient with yourself, and over time, you'll become more clear. Again, I'm not an expert, and so I'm open to being shown research that suggests otherwise. My understanding, the clear acceptance of false memories is that people can be made to believe things that didn't happen when those things are relatively common experiences. I've seen the examples that most young children at some point kind of got lost or just temporarily lost track of their parent, or their parent lost track of them while in some sort of a store. And so you can convince most adults that they one time got lost in this specific JCPenney. Even if they don't specifically recall that, you can implant that false memory. However, my understanding of what is controversial with false memories is implanting really extreme memories. I don't believe that you can convince somebody that they got in a severe car accident when they were 8 years old and were hospitalized for 6 months because they broke 15 bones. Especially if they didn't ever break a bone or they never had any car accident, I don't think you can convince somebody of that. And so I understand that is a real risk, though. False memories are a real risk. And sadly, CSA is pretty common. And so a lot of people did have some sort of CSA experience. And so could you then implant CSA memories? Could you convince them that it was this uncle or something like that, even when it wasn't that person? I do think so. And so I completely understand and respect that is why any good therapist would never say, I think you were raped, or I think you were molested, or I think your uncle did it. None of that would ever be appropriate in therapy, and I don't think that should be happening in books either. I do think that the revision is a good one. However, the passage that I was reading in this video that you commented on doesn't strike me as controversial, and just the book in general. It basically is encouraging people to trust themselves and to trust their symptoms, to trust their bodies. But I think that encouraging them to trust their instincts and their gut and stuff, I think can be a way of letting them lead. My gut feeling is that people who think this book is terribly controversial might fall on the side of not believing a lot of survivors, and perhaps might think that false memories are super common, that all these people are making false accusations against men who didn't do anything. That kind of nonsense. And I understand that this person was saying this was a college course, but I don't think that professors are always unbiased. Also, I wanted to note that kind of the commentary on that this book is harmful to people with PTSD or CPTSD. I would be interested in hearing more, especially evidence-backed stuff. My instinct is that the concept of false memories and bringing that suggestion up when people are suspecting CSA is potentially more harmful than this is.